Hi, it's Kaylee Bateman here for Mixing Light, and today I'm talking to Christian Ganea Reitmeier. He's the senior colorist at DNEG. He's based in Montreal, and we know one another from working together a while ago. Very excited to have him here talking to me today about the kind of unknown world of visual effects colouring. He had a background prior to working for DNEG in all kinds of finishing colour in different contexts. But since moving into visual effects colour, he's become the senior colorist for DNEG and knows all of the workflows and all of the things. It's quite a technical role that also combines a lot of creativity and understanding of the workflow over the whole process. So it's an absolute thrill to have you here today to explain this pretty unknown area of colouring.
Well, thank you very much, Kaylee. Those words are flattering me, and they are far from the reality sometimes. But yes, the VFX coloring world is something of a mystery for a lot of people. Like you said, I was jumping ship from finishing an online grading and color correction if we want, on different web series, TV series. I used to work in the public TV here and freelancing for various documentaries and co-productions and all kinds of things. When this opportunity of going into the VFX world presented itself, and you know me a little bit, so I'm a little crazy, and I jump, an opportunity to learn different things and different aspects of our world of grading, if you want. So I took it. Little did I know what I jumped into.
That's right, because it is so unknown from the outside, and you go, well, this will be interesting. Let's see. And you've taken to it like an absolute fish to water, and you really understand all of the technical aspects of the job in a way that I think some colorists go, well, I don't necessarily need to know that. I just need to know that it works. Whereas you have kind of taken that color science and that workflow, and you've really run with it.
I mean, I was very excited, but I was a little bit worried about the technicalities, the color science aspect of it. However, I like to get my teeth into the details of what's going under the hood, because in Resolve we are lucky if you properly set up your session and you know how to color manage your project the proper way, everything falls into places relatively well. That part was a little bit of a mystery because we, in a VFX company, we use a lot of Nuke and we use a lot of OCO configurations and we use some integration with Resolve. But all those took a while to get our heads around some very specific color management, linear log,
Yes, yes.
all those aspects of the image, color space transformations. We have so many options. So
Yes.
that side actually, after a few years, now it's synced in and I really like it.
I just want to ask the first question that I get asked all the time by people is, what is VFX coloring? What is it?
I would say, without hurting anyone's feelings, sometimes I associate it a little bit with DI, but without all the intricate creative aspects of a DI first pass. So, first and foremost, VFX grading is most important for balance and neutrals. So, we call them balance grades or neutral grades inside of the VFX world, because once all the plates are coming, be them in ACES, AP0, be them linear ARI, etc., they are getting this common space. All VFX companies are working differently, but there is a kind of a consensus that we tend to work in this ACES CG space, which is the equivalent of ACES in Resolve, but with some technical differences. So once we have this inside the space, obviously, like any other shoot or film, TV series, etc., etc., you have imbalances, right? Because you had a few days with sunny days, a few days with, well, less sunny days, and in a sequence, obviously the DI process already went and balanced and did a creative look. But since we are not working with those grades being baked into the XRs we receive, well, we need to start from scratch if you want. So we just have the various images. We just need to bring them in a common space if you want.
Right, right. So just to clarify, so you're saying you've got the rushes that have been shot, and there might be lighting changes because of, the sun coming in or going out, and if you've got exteriors, or even different angles, different lenses can have differences between them. And you take those rushes and you turn them into ACES CG, so you're linearizing them, and giving those, mapping those primaries to the ACES CG primaries, and that's handled sort of in a way that's the same for everything. It's all kind of homogenized. If there are different camera formats, they all end up in the same space for a show. And then from there, you need to balance them all and match them all so that they work together. So is that roughly capturing the process there?
That is exactly yeah, it captures the process, because us coming from DI, so from, well, DI or final color or finishing color, we don't have to deal with what's being added in the backgrounds. We just receive the final images if you want. Me being on the other side of the fence now in the VFX world, well, when all my friends who are doing magic in comps and layout and creature and set extensions, whenever they are adding, let's say, some set extensions in the background, if we do not have those balanced and neutral images, well, they have to work more. They have to work harder to integrate the same asset if we want. So the same building or the same creature that's going to be presented in various angles. So if we don't have the neutrals, then they have to work more to integrate their elements into the shots.
So the compositors then are going, I have my element, I have my creature, and I have my lighting pass, and that's been created sort of globally in a CG world. And so that's going to be the same everywhere, but oh, my footage is different shot to shot. So by smoothing out those differences and, utilizing, do you pick like a hero shot or something and say like everything's going to match that one, and maybe they've done their look development or something on that master shot, so it kind of getting everything else to match helps the composite.
Exactly. You're opening a parenthesis there because you mentioned hero shot and you mentioned look development. And the way we work is the way we work in a grading session, right? So I do like to pick a hero shot, like we would do in a sequence, regular sequence, if you do DI or if you start, grading a sequence. And that's usually a shot that includes, let's hope, more characters in that sequence. It's not a too wider of a shot. It's not too much of a close up. And, we start from there. Then the clients are giving us the primary grade, so that the client look, if you want, that was previously created in the eye. And we have those. And we always aim to go towards that direction, just because I give you a very general example. If the plates are super warm and super orangey, but the final client look is a very cold, very contrasty, very, very shadowy, contrasty, dense look, then there is no point for us to balance the sequence and go against that look. So I don't want to go hyper warm if the final look is hyper blue. So we can give and help the compositors and the other departments, lighting and creature and layout, to go towards that less saturated, less contrasty image to help their work.
Right. So the neutral and the balance then, it's subjective, is that right? Like you're creative within that, like you're not simply lining up red, green and blue and we're balanced.
Well, that's what I thought at the beginning. I was like, well, this is fairly straightforward, right? A technical grade. So we have the Macbeth chart. Usually we have the gray balls and the shiny light for the lighting, the reflection balls. And I was like, that's pretty easy. We are just comparing three patches of gray. We are lining up the values, and that's it. Job done. Well, little did I know, it's not like that easy. And I'm saying it's not easy. It's fun because it introduces a creative aspect to it. So in some shows, yes, those patches are working perfectly nice and fine. All the cameras align, and it's amazing and it's cool. However, our clients inside the VFX world are maybe not the external clients, but they are the VFX supervisor and the comp supervisor. So sometimes they have preferences. They know what they can do down the road, or with the pixel manipulation that they are doing. So they're like, no, I don't like a technical balance. Push it towards whatever the primary client look, or give me a little bit more warmth. Because, we always look for skin tones. We like pleasing skin tones. We always look for a common element in a shot. And in order to achieve that balance, sometimes it's not the character, sometimes it's the car, the red car. Or we did a, famous movie and there were several cars involved. So those needed to be very uh, matched and very close in the sequence because, they were building on top of that. So sometimes it can be a technical grade, sometimes it can be a little bit more creative. So
I might
that's the
jump in here
challenge.
and just say Christian is being very coy when he says a famous show. And I should have possibly mentioned this during the introduction, but I'll mention it now. If you want to see the kinds of shows that Christian's worked on, just check out his IMDb. They're all there. And have a look at what DNEG do. It's the absolute gold standard work in visual effects, but we won't be discussing any shows today in detail. But most people have no idea what a VFX colorist does.
Lots of people who ask me, what is this VFX coloring, grading, yes, it involves this technical aspect. But what I really like is we always work in a big team, right? So even though I cannot show anything basically because we do not have the final ownership of the grading on that show, it is it happens sometimes that we need to propose a creative grade on that sequence because it will better serve the work of the VFX artist. Obviously, we will never ever step against the created look or the defined look that was done in the eye with the DOP and the DI colorist. So we have to be very careful about that. We can't just go wild, but that's where I find there is a fine step. Yes, it is creative. Yes, it's very fine, and you can't go crazy, and yet it can be fun because an example I can give, we did some colors on a trailer, and if I was not mistaken, I didn't compare pixel for pixel, but what I've seen, the first image on that trailer was what we proposed. And of course, that creates a little bit of warm and fuzzy feeling. It's not just a credit. You can see your images on the screen, and it's amazing.
Mm. Yeah, I mean that creative side of it, you're part of the image development and the color development process. So the kinds of films that you work on might be in visual effects for a year or 2 years, and during that time there might be parts of the DI going on. There might still be grades being revised even editorially. But you are like the conduit in visual effects between these on-set colorists and the DI colorists and the editorial changes that might be happening. And you're kind of guiding that image and moving it through as the image starts to take shape. And I think you may see that mostly in sequences that have a lot of blue screens. Can you talk to me about grading blue screens? Because that's a real challenge.
So grading blue screen and green screen, initially, I like to key the blue screen or the green screen out and put a gray patch in the back. So that helps me, at least my eyes will not be tricked all the time by the green screen or the blue screen. And I can concentrate on the faces, the skin tones, the objects, or whatever is in those green screens. Of course, we have the scopes or we have the histograms, but when you look at an image and that gray is in the background, it's also helping me if I grade on top of it. Well, it tells me this gray looks a little bit tinted. You're doing something. Back off, you know. So that's just me. So I brought this in the VFX world whenever I show some of the sequences with the blue screen, green screens. And they are like, yes, can you tweak a little bit this? Or can we tweak a little bit this? And we're like, the lighting is a little bit different. We have a wide shot, we have a close up. Let's put this gray background in the background and let's compare then. Because a lot of people are, well, they are aware, but it's unconscious, it's subconscious, right? They're looking at the images, they're like, I feel like this is like this. When you take that green and blue screen away, the images are falling into the place they are supposed to be.
That's right. And even when you know that, because our eyes white balance after time, even though you know that that's happening, you can't really do anything about it. So the longer that you look at a blue screen, the more you're going to adjust for the blue. And so you're going to see it more neutral, and then that's going to affect the warmth or the coolness of the shot quite dramatically. But like you say, once you take that out, and when you put in that grey, are you looking at an 18% grey? Are you looking at a really like that classic neutral patch, right?
I'm trying to put the 18, well, actually the 18% gray, which is 50 usually on the scopes. So,
Yes,
yes,
18% in linear, 50 on the scopes.
that is it. I try to put that because I would say that's the gray patch that we are mostly used to, and it gets ingrained in your, I can't say mechanical memory, I can say visual memory. But adding that in there, it's an ease of mind for the VFX soups, com soups, because they can see it in a more neutral environment. 30 seconds or more, you're just looking at an image, your eyes are balancing, like they are they're tricking you basically. So that's why the gray, that's why I always say, let's have a look at the scopes, let's have a look at the histogram at some point, because it's easy to get carried away in the little values in the black, the little values in the whites, the little values here. We can measure so many things now in Nuke or in Baselight and even in Resolve, right? But sometimes is a perception, and sometimes um, it's a tricky it's a tricky color. The eye is tricked actually by the surrounding colors into thinking that this is not what you actually see.
Yeah, I have a rule that I live by, even in a really time sensitive context in TI, that if you make a really crazy decision at 5 p.m., it's probably the wrong one. The morning is the time when you've got the fresh eyes. So, do you have any other tricks that you use for that sort of material? Because I'm familiar with, if I'm trying to get a balance on a shot and it's really difficult, sometimes I'll flip it into black and white. And I do that in a finishing color context, just to reset my eyes. After I come back out of black and white, I see the colors as they are again for at least a moment, and I can trust that moment. It's also really good for gauging contrast, of course. But do you have any other little tricks that you might be able to share with us?
That's that's the best trick that I was taught by a colorist as well. Um, the story goes, when you balance a sequence, you can try and do the first pass in black and white. You're gonna get your contrast there, and especially when we balance, to go back a little bit to a technical step, these balance neutrals in Nuke, however we use it, we can't have access to all the operators we usually have in a grade in Resolve.
Good point. Good point.
So it's a little bit limitative, but like we usually say, from a limitative point of view, it pushes you to find just from RGB balancing a point where everything meets in the middle. So even if you don't have access to contrast, saturation, etc., it pushes you to force yourself. And the black and white pass, that's a good pass. If we have very complicated sequences, I like to put them in black and white, and I like to see if my contrast levels are there. And then another, except the wipes that we can do between the images, that's, well, of course, comparing to the hero shots all the time and not forgetting the hero shots that we picked in the beginning, which happened to me on a few cases, and we continue with a different shot. So you are just slightly, going on a sideline, just a tiny bit still.
But it is important though. I think even in Final Color, when you pick your heroes, you continue to go back to the same reference because every shot's going to have a small amount of difference between them. You can't help that, right? But you're saying how like the importance is to go back to that first initial chosen hero, right?
Always.
Otherwise, you're introducing a small amount of difference every time you refer.
Absolutely. This is how I learned in the beginning when I was in the VFX world, right? Because of the limitations of the operators we use, either in Nuke or in Resolve, you just have to stick to that hero shot because it is so easy with the limitations to introduce a slightly, well, a tint, right? Somewhere. It doesn't matter which direction it is. And then you have a new shot and it's really nice, and you're in a very good spot, in a very good position, and you like that shot, and you're like, oh, from now on I'm just going to check with this shot. Well, no, we should always go back to the hero, at least, from a time to time, like, more often than less, go back to the hero shot. We can compare between, well, the new one that we like, but the hero, it's the Bible, and it helps us not to diverge too much from the center line.
Especially when you're talking about sequences and films, like when DNEG's the main vendor for a film, like you might be dealing with, correct me if I'm wrong, but like thousands of shots.
And because all those sequences in a movie, they can be different places, different locations, even if we come back to them, time of days. So it's very important not to say these are similar angles. I'm going to refer to the same hero from the other sequence because that was nice, because maybe that was in the new sequence. It's a different time of day. The intention is different. So all the tiny details are becoming very important when you can't rely on our favorite tools, secondaries. Let's put a little vignette there. Let's do a hue shift.
Please, yes, please talk to me about this. So you've mentioned having a very particular tool set of operators. Can you tell me what those operators are?
Most of the VFX companies, I would say, they work with the standard CDL SOP values: slope, offset, and power. That's the standard means of transportation, of exchange of the grades between DI and the VFX houses. That was the case.
And there's I think a few reasons for that, right? And I just want to jump in and explain something here. So that was a standard that was put together by the ASC early on, and that was done between a collaboration with color scientists and DPs. But when you were moving from film to digital, to talk about what kinds of parameters colorists and especially dailies colorists should have, like how much control they should have over the images. And one of the reasons why that's such an elegant system is that you can do a lot with those 10 values. You get 3 for slope, 3 for offset, 3 for power, and then 1 more for saturation, which leads you to 10 values. You can do a lot with that. Like, it's really powerful, but it's still simple enough for you to be able to look at and say, oh, I can see from these 10 numbers what's changed in this shot. Like, a DP might look at it and say, oh, they've really had to push that a lot. Maybe my balances are off, or, oh, they haven't moved that much. It must be we're pretty well balanced in the camera. And then one of the cool things for VFX is that it's mathematically accurate. So you can go forwards and backwards, you can add and remove, and you don't, it's lossless. Is that right? You're not losing?
I think my understanding of the mathematic behind it, and I may be wrong, but my color science friends could correct us. It's a easy, simple enough operator that does not require a lot of power, machine power, if you want, to apply it in the quick times, compared to a cube, for example.
And a cube is also potentially a lossy, compressed, destructive operation, right? Like 1D, maybe not, but 3D definitely.
Exactly. So I think the main consensus was CDLs in the SOP values were the simplest tool with a broad stroke, simple enough but powerful enough to give you looks and grades that are or can be powerful. Um, I can give you an example where I had the chance at the beginning of the project to talk to the colorist that was on the final side. And that's one of the perks that sometimes we may have. So we can talk to the final colorist and actually discussing how CDLs compared to a full power baselite or resolve grade differs, and how sometimes a CDL grade is a very good tool, an effective one, and sometimes it's maybe not the best tool because it has limits. And in the case we were discussing, it was a film, so film stock project, and to get the DOP looks with a CDL, that was, well, maybe not possible. So they decided to go, with a different baselite or resolve full grade. But for the most projects, when I would say everything is well thought from the beginning and planned, and the show lots are in place and used, and the DI process has time and to go through the sequences, a CDL does a great job.
In that case, it sounds as though they were trying to achieve things that a primary grade couldn't necessarily do, right? Like, perhaps you would need curves, secondaries, operations that aren't so easily invertible or perhaps impossible to invert. And one of the important things about, where VFX sits in the pipeline is you don't want to be doing something that's going to change the look of the plate. Because when you deliver to DI, no color choices should be baked in, should they?
Absolutely. So the most important thing that, well, sometimes there are exceptions to the rules, but we should never grade the plates per se, unless it's adjustments or tiny adjustments to the hue, a specific hue, or but if we are talking about grades and general grades applied over the whole image, then we are coming into play. So we're using the client ones or we are proposing new ones, but those are never destructive.
Always metadata, aren't they?
They're never in the XRs. They're always given as a metadata. So when you are in the eye, you just apply them and you have the same result as you've seen before in the eye with the effects added. And the difference is inherent to what I mentioned before: smoke, atmosphere, rays, tiny hue shifts in costumes to maintain the continuity of the sequence, etc., etc. But never baking.
I mean, that's an amazing feat of color science to be able to visualize and do so much whilst keeping everything pristine and protecting the negative like that. Like that's incredible workflow.
And I would say, to move the CDL discussion a little bit further, because we have the luxury of going in Resolve, in some shows, we can even propose a cube or an LMT. In the general term of an LMT, I'm not necessarily referring to the ACES LMT, but just to give a color a color tweak, if you want, that is more complex than a CDL, that will be applied in the final looks of the client QuickTimes, and we can help with that as well. So that's also an exciting thing that we can do, to
That's
help the
great.
comp work actually
That's
sell the
great. So,
shots.
so when you're talking about LMT, that raises a really good point. So, one of the things that we haven't explicitly mentioned is um, when you're working in visual effects, you aren't working display referred. So, what you see is what you get, but only if you've got the correct OCIO config and everything, or the color science journey is correct, then what you see is what you get, but it is scene referred. So using an LMT, you're not baking in any kind of display transform in that process at all.
Exactly, that's exactly what I mean. In a let's say in a simplified quote unquote workflow, ACEs, let's pick ACEs. Um, the the display transform, which is at the end, it happens because it's by default included in the OCIO setup. I mean, if it's not ACEs and if it's a different color gamut we work in, that's also, it can be adapted. OCIO is very malleable as a system. However, for ACEs, where the LMT concept came, that cube that we can export from Resolve and get it back in the pipeline in the VFX world, it does not include the display tone curve. So never, we are not double lutting, we are not applying contrast and curves that are not supposed to be there. So we are just including color decisions, but more complex color decisions into a cube, never including the display tone curve. So, and never baking into the XR. It's just for display reasons if we want. And the easy side of that is, let's say in a VFX environment, some people are going to see things on their calibrated monitor, whether it's 709, whether it's sRGB. Some people will see things in a cinema room, so they would be a P3. Um, and because that LMT is supposed to live inside the ACES system, if you want, all the display transforms at the end are taken care of by the OCO. So you can see the same thing, and you can be confident that what you're seeing in a cinema room and what you're seeing on a different display Well, if all the settings and the color setups in Resolve are properly set up, then you are confident that what you see is what you will get.
Yes, yes. But yeah, it's amazingly powerful, and it kind of gives you the best of both worlds because you can preview, decisions that were made on set, and you can preview decisions that are being made in the DI. And you can see how the visual effects are going to look through those color processes and know with certainty that things are translating the way that the artists intended, and the visual effects supervisors intended. And people are then, like, the client's able to see things in a way that's familiar to them. They don't have to look at log images. They're going to know, that the monster or whatever's been added to the frame is actually, showing up. And when you pull the
Yes.
blacks down, it's not going to disappear.
One of the important aspects is that Aces brought to the game is creatures and textures. Um, in some shows, the final creative look of the show, right, is strong, powerful, and those artists, before the end of the comps, they would need a neutral environment to work in. So by being able with to work under different views, um, that helps them. So the textures, and like you mentioned, the monster is green. Well, it needs to be green, but under the client look, it might be a little bit different. So they need to be aware of that so they can adjust textures and skin and etc. etc.
Yeah, yeah. So it's a little bit like, it reminds me of hair and makeup tests, but for elements that you're creating from scratch, right? Because you do your hair and makeup test to make sure that everything's translating, even if it was film, oh, well, that, we can't put them in that red jumper because that doesn't work well when you print it to that stock or whatever. So it's really that print aspect of the pipeline that you get to preview, but then you can take it right off again, and you can do it with a click instead of a chemical process. It's pretty cool. Can you tell me about? Oof, there's so many things to cover with visual effects grading, but can you tell me a little bit about what would be your process of dealing with a challenging location with a lot of variable lighting?
The changes or differences. That's again comes and starts with me chatting with the VFX supervisor or the com supervisor or both, and they are trying to explain us what are they trying to achieve with the final shots, because I'm not seeing those until the work is advanced. So if we have just a beach, and things happening on that beach, shot in different days, different weather situations, I have no idea if we're keeping the sky, if we're replacing the sky, if it's important to keep the sky matching, or they are no, ignore that. We're going to do sky replacement for all the shots. Do not take it into account. Let's pick a hero shot and let's see what's important. The horse, the car, the obviously the main characters, but that goes without saying. Um, but then we're going into the challenge that you mentioned. The sand is going to look different because, or if it's not sand, it's a better example. Snow, grading snow, we all love it. So um, that's when it comes into account hero shot. And then I'm saying, what is our tolerance? So if we are to make the snow or the sand um, slightly, it falls under slightly greenish or slightly magenta. I don't personally like slightly magenta in lots of I think a lot of colorists are not liking anything slightly magenta. So um, we decide on that, and then we're trying to match everything the best we can within that tolerance. So is it perfect? No.
It's such a good point that you raise. Yeah, I love that you raise the point of, you know, you have to know what work is being done on these plates, because when you're doing a final color, everything that is in the plate is on screen. When you're doing visual effects color, these people are so clever. These visual effects artists are so incredibly clever. They could be doing anything to these shots. So you really need to know, like you say, am I going to sit here and waste 20 hours matching skies and then find out that they're throwing those skies away, because it's actually set on Pluto and there's going to be, a star field there instead.
Absolutely. Like, if I go back to the example of the snow or the sand, maybe that will not even stay in the reality parameters. So even if I do match them, but then that turns to be a foreign planet, like you mentioned, or a fantastic land, everything will be practically hue shifted, and the clouds will be green or whoever. We don't know. So that's why I find it's important if we have that discussion at the beginning with odd situations, what is going to be done in those shots. And I don't need to know the details in the utmost details, but at least the general idea, so we can then match and grade to help them deliver them the shots with least effort. Well, least effort. They always put a lot of effort into those to look magic like they do.
But it's about making that workflow efficient for them, and
Exactly.
so that they can then focus on the things that are really important to their department. So you're cutting that part of the effort out ideally for them. Even though every compositor that I've ever met is an incredible colorist as well, because they just have that eye. It's part of compositing. It's like having another colorist as a client.
It describes exactly the situations, because these artists are integrating, well, you know, worlds in those shots, and they have to they have to be extremely careful about the tiny shadows, the tiny details, the tiny highlights, the speculars, everything that they add to a shot needs to be matching and integrating. And yes, that requires an eye for a shadow in the middle of the day is not the same shadow as morning or a shadow in the evening. So the way I see our work, even if it's in the shadow and in the background, it's to support their decisions and to make their decisions easier. And I find that the fact that some VFX companies have these roles proves that, well, it's not just an extra layer of let's grade or let's do things. It proves that they are, well, a supportive, important role.
That's right. That's right. Because that kind of work that you're doing there, that visual effects coloring, in a company that doesn't have a dedicated colorist, that work, if I understand correctly, would be done by compositors. That would fall to compositive supervisors, or
I think that's the general consensus. In some other companies, the compositor supervisors are taking over those roles. Um, and some of the compositor or the lead compositors probably as well, because they do have an eye for color. Whenever some people are coming into our company and they find out that there is a dedicated department and people taking care of those things, I feel a relief. And I feel the not just because they can't do it, because obviously they can, but the amount of work these people do,
I
and the
know it's
amount of
mountains.
exactly the pixels they need to move. If someone with an eye for this takes care of the sequences, I think that's what I hear. I think it's a very big relief for them to trust us.
Oh, absolutely. And whether it's done by a comp soup or a lead compositor or by the color department, I think what you all have in common is that you don't work on individual shots the way that an artist would be. Um, because you've mentioned the hero shot and matching, you need to be in the same way that you are in DI across the whole sequence and across the narrative intention in a way as well.
Towards the end of the project, the fact that one person has access to the whole sequence as opposed to the artist trying to match to hero shots, that has an advantage, obviously, because one pair of eyes sees the whole sequence. Um, we can take decisions based on that. So before that gets sent and approved by the client as a final shot, when we have to do some tweaks, seeing a sequence is of a giant help, of course.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. So you see initially when you check the client grades that everything from a quality control perspective is working. But then towards the end of the process, you can also, if necessary or if you're asked to, make other adjustments to make sure that if there is a change between the lighting and shots, that it can be dealt with by grade as opposed to a comp change.
Exactly.
And obviously that, like, keeping that internal is good for, efficiency, and it creates less work for other people in other departments. It doesn't have to go for a check in DI because you can check it with your colorist knowledge.
Yeah, we say that, we never step onto the DI ownership of the grades, of course. But if we can help them start in a better position, then we can, and with minor nudging and adjustments, then I don't think that you or I, as a final colorist, would get that, would be extremely mad at things because it would simplify and, um, make more efficient your work in refining and, carving more details of the images. So
That's right. And because each process, each part of the process is available, you could even say, well, I just need to see the difference between the onset grade and what came out of VFX. Oh, they've had to darken it a bit. I see. Or, oh, look, they warmed it up. Okay, I get it. It's just another visualization and another step in the thought process that shapes the image, and you make that available in a way that is take it or leave it.
exactly, I would say we're always on the same side, supporting the creative visions of the director, obviously, and the DOP, but the VFX supervisor that is supporting them in his own role, and we are there to make his life easier as well. So um, it's just, like we say, tiny adjustments that are building up to this final product, which is usually and hopefully amazing and great and colorful and magic. Because VFX world does work with mainly, um, well, fantastic science fiction and sometimes less visible effects, and that's also a world where they they are invisible effects, and that is also a challenge sometimes. Then every project comes with a different aesthetic, and it comes with a different setting, different cameras, different camera used, different color sciences if you want. But the the quality and the perfection on some wide shots shot on an island somewhere is just mind blowing. And you can see the quality and the effort that was put into those. So I'm trying not to do anything to diminish that.
Yes. Yes, I know exactly what you mean. Like, sometimes the job is to not destroy how gorgeous it looks and do as little as you can get away with doing because it's there. And I think something that you just mentioned that I'd love to hear a tiny little bit more about is the different workflows. And another great thing about being a visual effects colorist and in your position is that you would get to understand a lot of different workflows.
That was one of the things that getting an understanding of the pipelines was one of my, well, curiosities, if you want. So, getting or reading all the VFX specs from the shows and understanding we are bringing all the cameras into the common space, and we decide that for the VFX vendors, we are giving ACES AP0 or we are which is amazing because well most of the houses will work ACCG, so the transformation between ACES AP0 as a transport gamut if we want uh, to ACCG is straightforward. Well, we can say straightforward. It's taken care of the OCO easily when you're doing it right. We can replicate it in Resolve very easily without too much complication if you want. Other shows decided that each camera would be treated in its own color space. So red would be treated as red, RE would be treated as RE, etc., etc. And that adds to the challenges when we receive the images. We need to be aware of those. So when our departments are ingesting the images, well, color science needs to state that very clear for them. Be aware that some cameras are require different treatments because otherwise we get differences and we don't know where and etc etc. So
I think what it really highlights for me is that the way that color is dealt with when you've got people working linearly and, lighting working in the closest way to optical as possible because you're creating effects, even if they're not invisible effects, they still need to be extremely realistic and believable effects. So you're working in these color spaces that can deal with that and can make that translate on screen. Everyone's got their own preferred way of doing it. You need that pipeline to be complex. And then someone throws in another camera format at you, and you're like, that's expanding the complexity again. But it's like almost exponentially.
the possibilities are infinite, like we say. That's why I sometimes, most of the times actually, I look at my color science colleagues and I'm like, wow, you guys, the infinite possibilities and complexities you guys deal with. We say that as a VFX colorist in a VFX companies, we have to deal with technical and creative aspects, but they have to make sure that all these color transformations and decisions are working for a myriad of softwares, right? Because lighting and layout and comp and creature and so many softwares, and they need to well make them work. Um, so the pipeline is seamless and it's invisible if we want to the artists, right? Because they need to concentrate on their creative work and not have to deal with well technicalities or glitches and etc etc. So
Yeah,
kudos to
those
them.
I know. There needs to be like a World Color Scientist Day where we can all give them a bunch of flowers and shake their hands and thank them because when you work with a color scientist, you realize just how much you rely on them.
Absolutely. Like you mentioned, I like a technical challenge or a
Yeah.
technical knowledge acquisition, and I like to read some of those color sciencey documents. But I'm like, when we come to equations and fractions and probabilities and double integrals and mathematics, even if I study them in school, I'm like, you guys, kudos. I leave this to you because
Yes. And I reckon that that narrow and specialized understanding that every person has in the pipeline of a visual effects show is what makes them capable of creating these incredible images, because they're just beyond, like, so many films that you work on. I would watch with my jaw absolutely on the ground going, how is that possible? And it's, I think, because in that company, you have so many giant brains that are so good at their island. And there is that teamwork, that network of trust that, after years working on something, it does come together and it does
Absolutely.
look that good.
I can't name the names of the shows, but I had the chance to meet the visual effects supervisors on those highly visible projects. And just to have access to their mind, how do they plan and how do they support the director to plan those sequences? For me, just that, without going into details, was joy, pure joy. How did you come up with this kind of rigging of sets meets visual effects meets real effects? Um, we are all exposed to the making ofs of these movies today, but seeing them from the inside sometimes is mind blowing. Like, yeah, the magic and the way they can push the boundaries of these movies is just amazing.
I'm so grateful for you sharing this insight with us, and with me and with Mixing Light. And I'm beyond impressed with what you guys can do. And I think you have a very enviable position. And for anyone who didn't know what visual effects coloring was before and is now aware of it, it's on your radar. These roles do exist in big companies and they bring more than you would think in terms of the joy of being involved in these major productions.
Well, you summed it up actually very nicely. I think of us VFX colorists as the added value to the efficiency of the work for the comps and the other departments. And also, I would not lie. I mean, I would lie if I would say that working on those high end images is not cool. Plainly said like this, because we all did the the advertising, the TV commercials, the other projects. And when I started the VFX role, I was really unsure. I was unsure. What am I getting into? Am I going to be up to the standard, or the my experience would be helping or not? Would I have to start from scratch, etc., etc., etc.? And well, it turned out, like you mentioned, some of my and our baggage helps a lot, and you get to learn and touch amazing images on the way. So win-win.
What an absolute treat for you, and what a treat for me to get to speak to you today. Thank you so much for joining us, and I cannot wait to see the next film with a Christian's magic VFX color on it. I'm sure it's going to be another big one, and hopefully I'll get to speak to you again and find out more about what you do. But for now, this has been Kaylee Bateman for Mixing Light.